All right, welcome to episode 10 of Roid Rage. We are going to talk about concept of operations, affectionately known as ConOps here, which is basically how we take a half-brain idea that's in a pitch deck that Matt created some years ago and then turn that into a real mission. So I'm not going to say it doesn't fall apart, but it falls apart minimally. So hopefully out of this episode, you will get a sense of how we build our ConOps here, where and when it goes wrong, and how we pressure test it to figure out before it's too late. But we've got Robyn back. How was Machu Picchu?
Oh man, altitude is everything, man. That just took the literal wind out of me.
God, that was terrible.
Well, welcome back. We missed you. All right, ConOps, not to be confused with Con Air, because I'm sure someone's going to make that joke at some point.
I can't believe I just took crap about taking the wind out of me and you're making a joke about Con Air.
All right, Robyn, welcome back. Explain it to me like I'm 5. What is ConOps?
ConOps, that stands for Concept of Operations. And fundamentally for our spacecraft, it means what exactly are we doing and when are we doing it so that you can begin to design the mission, right? So you could say like, oh, ConOps is we're going to go mine an asteroid. Might need just a shade bit more detail than that. So you start getting into what are the different phases of the mission and how you're going to define it. And that helps the team to start eating the elephant one bite at a time.
I mean, look at it in very simple terms. You experience a ConOps on an airplane, right? There's taxiing, there's takeoff, there's climbing to altitude, there's cruising, there's lowering your altitude, hopefully not hitting the ground, and landing. And then taxiing to your gate. And like that is the ConOps of an airplane, right? That's how airplanes operate.
Yep.
We have the exact same thing for a spacecraft. We just replace those words. It's different stages as you go through. And the level of discrepancy there matters on the stage you go to and how individual you want to be with each team at the company.
Where does this start, right? So like, let's go back to like when you're thinking about starting AstroForge. We'll skip by what AstroForge was initially and have to save that for another podcast. But like, you're creating a pitch deck, usually the first artifact of a company. Do you have a ConOps in mind at that point, or are you still steps away from it?
I don't call it that because ConOps, again, it's a stupid abbreviation of a word that says concept of operations, which I went to my mom and be like, here's our concept of operations. She's gonna be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What I call
that about a lot of things you say.
That is true. I just don't talk to her. What instead we do on a pitch deck is describe a milestone, right? So we say, for the next mission vestry, we want to get and land on an asteroid. We want to land on an asteroid. That's what an investor, and that's what a normal person is going to care about. Like, what is the mission objective you're going to? Again, to go back to an airplane, like, you don't buy a ticket and it says, we're going to do X, Y, Z. It says, like, you're going to take off in LAX and get to New York. You don't actually care about all the steps to get there. That's an engineering problem. That's a problem of the pilots and the people maintaining the aircraft, not a user problem. And to me, investors or people we're talking to externals are these users of our product, right? They need to understand what milestone we're hitting that gets us on the path to mining. So this is not something that's covered in the pitch deck. This is actually what teams are for, is to take this idea that's in a pitch deck that says, go land on an asteroid, and implement it into all these discrete stages, and then write software, develop hardware, look at thermal models based on what those stages are.
Is this a static document, dynamic document? Like, how do you two think about this as like?
Well, it's definitely not static. I mean, we already talked about the design spiral. So, I mean, you go for a concept of operations is part of the mission design. And the mission design is also, well, I'd like to go to an asteroid. Well, how far away? And at what rate is it going to spin? And so it starts to go into how you design the spacecraft. Concept of operations is the same thing. Like, well, how long between when I can communicate with the spacecraft? Is it 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month? It's also breaking it down into like, hey, we launch. The spacecraft has to be in a certain configuration when we launch. And then the moment it's deployed, it's going to do some stuff on its own before we ever even talk to it. And then it's going to wait for us to tell it what to do next. Or is it going to wait a certain amount of time? Yeah. So that all goes into the concept operation so that you can begin to plan the rest of what the team is doing, when it's doing it, and write procedures and be able to execute your mission.
Does anybody else use this stupid word in any other industries, or is this a space-only term? Chap, have you ever heard this outside of space?
I mean, I've only worked in space, so.
I've heard this from friends who are in the military. if they're planning a mission, saying like, what's the and it's actually maybe it is ConOps, but it's something similar. Like, what are we actually supposed to like? I would call.
Can we
this
get like the military rules of engagement too? Like,
I mean, so we use it, and the people that killed Osama used it.
As far as I know, yeah. I mean, like,
Sweet.
you know, we from a software background, you would have a product roadmap that would sort of say, hey, here's what the product's trying to do. Here are the milestones that we're trying to like accomplish along the way. Here are some of the key trade-offs that we're going to make, whether it's in engineering or something like that. But like, yeah, this was the first time that I had actually like really sort of encountered it as an artifact that lives in a company that actually has a lot of importance in this company. It's not just like a wasted exercise here.
no, not at all. No, I mean, the team has to understand the phases of the mission so that you can work on it, because otherwise it is such a big problem to solve in all one thing. And what the spacecraft does initially after it's deployed from the launch vehicle, what it's doing in that time frame is completely different than when it's approaching an asteroid. And so there are these different phases of the mission when different parts of the spacecraft are going to be active, and different ways of navigating in space, and all of that is important to understand, and also make sure that the team is focusing on the right elements in those different phases.
Yeah. We currently have a ConOps document for mission 3.
Yes.
You want to walk through it?
Well, I mean, I can walk through some of the phases. Yeah. So as Matt said earlier, in terms of like, well, what's the big overarching goal, right? We want to dock or rendezvous with an asteroid. I don't like land.
Landing's a hard word to use here because like we as humans interpret it as landing, but when you're kind of landing on something that has very minimal gravity, and if you think about an asteroid that's 100 meters in diameter, made out of iron, you can calculate the gravity, and it's really fucking small. And so you don't really land on these. You are going to it's more akin to like a capsule docking with a space station or something like that. So
Yeah, it's a gentle kiss.
yeah, it's a very different way to think about it for sure.
So, walking through some of the big phases of the mission, right? So there's pre-launch, which is a whole like, how do we operate the spacecraft to make sure that we operate it in a way that it doesn't do some of the things that we want it to do in space, right? Like, so we don't want the propulsion system to turn on, but we also need to check it out. And so there's some safety devices in there, and remove before flight plugs and that kind of fun stuff. Then there's launch, which in our case, the spacecraft is completely turned off. It is, and it has to be turned off and cannot turn on. It's actually one of the things we have to prove is that during the launch environments, the spacecraft doesn't boot up, doesn't turn on. So that's another part of which seems trivial, but it's not. There's the deployment when it separates away from the launch vehicle and begins to do its thing, right? So it deploys solar arrays, it turns on, it looks for the sun, it moves itself around to the sun, it starts collecting solar energy to become power positive, and starts calling home and saying, what would you like me to do next, right? The next phase, and this is the one that for the most part starts getting into like what the team actually is working really hard on in real time, is the commissioning, right? So, spacecraft's healthy. You got to go step through all the different functions on the spacecraft to make sure that every single instrument and every single payload and every function is working the way that you intended it to work, right? And so that's called commissioning the spacecraft, getting it ready, making sure that all of your thermal predictions are matching up right, and things are staying warm that need to be warm, things are staying cold that need to stay cold, that you're remaining power positive. And then in our case, we use the lunar gravity well to adjust our trajectory, either a plane change or an alignment with a particular target. And so there's a lunar flyby phase, and that may or may not include propulsion. It may or may not include orienting the spacecraft, turning around and calibrating the imager against known orbital bodies like the moon and Earth and that kind of thing. And then once you leave that phase, now you're into cruise. Now, what's cruise? Cruise is we are either free flying with no propulsion, maybe communicating with Earth, maybe not communicating with Earth, or potentially executing propulsion maneuvers, which in our case, Vestry is going to be a low thrust, a very low thrust, but long duration thrust, continuous thrust. So we're going to kind of spiral out instead of having a more instantaneous bipropellant. And so during cruise mode, we actually have this propulsion, right?
Yep.
And while you're propulsing, there's a certain amount of angular momentum buildup. And so at some point, you will need to stop thrusting, reorient the spacecraft, and then burn off some of this excessive angular momentum, right? So that's all part of cruising and basically getting along. And then you get somewhere near the asteroid and you have to enter a new phase, which is terminal navigation or rendezvous, where, okay, I think the asteroid is supposed to be over here. I have to look for it. I have to find it.
Yep.
And then I have to back calculate. The spacecraft has to back calculate exactly what it needs to do to approach the asteroid, get closer to it. So there's all these different phases, and then obviously landing, or, you know, a gentle kiss in the night with the asteroid. That's a whole nother phase. And then conducting science. So there's kind of all these different phases. And then, of course, during that entire time, the spacecraft is making sure that it's healthy, right? There's a whole separate subsystem underneath that's like, are you still there?
Yep.
Are you paying attention to me? Are you awake? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Are you in control? And if any of those answers come back no, or I'm not sure, it needs to be able to self-recover, right? Because unfortunately, we can't just pull off the side of the road and, you know, take the radiator cap off and let the steam go. So yeah, there you go. I mean, that's kind of those different concept of operations. And then you fold that into, of course, people on the ground doing work and shifts and sleep and eating and all that good stuff.
Well, and it gets way more complicated too. There's the part you're leaving out that I think is really important is there's a time associated with each one of these. So commissioning the spacecraft, we have X number of days to commission the spacecraft, or we are not able to use the lunar gravity assist, right? And we either impact the moon or get lost in deep space. So every one of these needs to also have contingencies that we build in, and these become really complicated to a certain level where, like, you actually can't plan for every single contingency that can happen. So you got to look at the main ones, what your risks are, what you go through. And these are really detailed things. I mean, this is the whole way you build out a mission. This is actually the crux of how you start designing and really iterating on a spacecraft.
Who owns this? Is it one person? Is it spread across the team?
I mean, the overall ownership, I think, ends up lying with Matt and I, but it's really a team ownership piece, because part of the concept of operation then goes into what abilities you want to have to recover. To Matt's point, you can't plan for every single contingencies, but they're based on the history of other spacecraft. You certainly better plan for at least some of the kinds of failures that are going to be likely, whether that's a, you know, single event upset due to gamma ray or, you know, cosmic ray hitting your spacecraft and flipping a bit or not, you know, those kinds of things. Like, you have to plan for all that.
There's a lot of ways to plan with it. I mean, spacecraft, notoriously, deep spacecraft have what is called safe mode. And so whenever they detect a failure or something is out of bounds, whether we call those boundaries red lines or blue lines, it's actually not important. If something is off nominal on the spacecraft, they'll go into a specific mode that's very low energy and just has a communication back to Earth. And I think I'm actually not aware of a spacecraft that hasn't entered safe mode in deep space. I think almost every single one has. That's gone out there. I mean, some famous NASA missions have gone into modes where, like, oh, this is totally bad. And like, if they wouldn't have done that, they would have lost the mission. Cassini is a really interesting story on how this all happened, right? Cassini had some major software problems on its way out there that safe mode saved it from, and they were able to re-upload and fix it in its flight. So these things are pretty important to plan for, but it's also important to plan for a mode where you can try to recover in space.
Yeah. How long does it take you to plan for this?
Forever. We don't stop.
Yeah, I don't think, you never stop. I mean, you're constantly updating it based on current knowledge or things that you learn. Behavior of the hardware, right? I mean, we build an entire flat sat or hardware in the loop satellite that we test all of our software on and make sure that all of our hardware is working, but also how does it behave, right? I mean, there's some things that you would call working, but are characteristics that you need to know, like maybe this computer sometimes takes a little longer to boot up and that other device over there doesn't like that. That's not necessarily a failure, but it is a behavior that you better understand. So no, you're totally always updating your concept of operations.
Including like alternative missions. I mean, I think it was Voyager 2 that has an alternative mission path because of a failure on board.
Messenger as well, right? I mean,
even Voyager 1, right? Like Voyager 1 has had instruments fail and shut down. It's gone through, and that was kind of predicted.
Yeah.
Not that they had all this planned out. And so when you go into it, you try to figure out what you can use and how you can continuously use the spacecraft. And that's what notoriously happens in all these missions that go out there.
Yeah. What are the common ones? Like, what are the errors that you think about? Or not errors, but like, what are the behaviors that you think about? Hey, this could throw us off the nominal path let's localize it to vestry.
Oh man, I was totally going to bring
Predict
up
the future, Robyn.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh, here's the failures that I thought about.
Odin too, but yeah, we
Well, no, I was actually thinking about other missions that had some significant problems that had to be recovered from that were not predicted, right? So like a long time ago, Galileo went to Jupiter and they had a deployable antenna, right? So obviously Jupiter's really far away. And so it's not good enough to use simple antennas. You got to use these big parabolic dish antennas. And so they decided to use a deployable antenna that fit better in the launch vehicle configuration. But it didn't fully deploy, right? So this big high gain antenna that they had planned to use didn't work. It looks like a big umbrella that opened, except it broke and didn't open all the way. Well, so the Galileo team had to upload software updates that would essentially allow compressed images instead of uncompressed images to be sent over a long period of time. So it took its images and rather than beaming them directly down via the high gain antenna, it recorded them on a tape and then played that tape at a much slower rate through the low gain antenna. And so they were able to continue to get data through the mission. They just had to find ways to do that at a reduced rate. None of that software was written in real time. So they had to update it over what's called an over the air update on the software. And where I'm headed with that is we fully expect to have to update the software on Vestry. Updating software is like installing a new operating system or a new program. Like, oh yeah, sure, that's going to go well, right? You better have I can back up to something if it doesn't work right. So you have to have a process, a concept of operations where you do all that testing on the ground to make sure you're as absolutely confident as you can be that it's going to upload and work correctly once it's uploaded. But yeah, I mean, that's just part of the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most famous examples of this is Apollo 13. Apollo 13 was supposed to be a lander where we went and landed on the moon and got, Tom Hanks got to walk around the moon. Obviously, that didn't happen because they stirred an oxygen tank and it exploded. And, maybe Tom Hanks goes in the future.
Yeah.
But, and they had to totally redo the operations that they went on and did a slingshot around the moon and were able to come back to Earth. That's a great example of a contingency where you don't have the primary mission. It doesn't happen. You got to come back. I think that's one everybody knows. It's important for us to always try to have backup contingencies. And actually, this is famously, if you get into the details of Shuttle, where Shuttle got things really wrong. There was a part during Shuttle. There's actually a chart. We can put it up. Rachel, I'll make you find it and put it online. There's a chart of all the contingencies.
He won't know the difference.
On launch for Saturn V. And during the whole launch phase of Saturn V, there's an escape module for the first booster phase. You can remove yourself from the rocket. Shuttle famously made an exception that they would not have this during solids. Shuttle did not have an escape plan. And what happened, right, in 1986 was that showed its face. Like they had a failure. The solid blew up and there was no contingency to save everybody on there. Where if that was on Saturn, which didn't have solids, but you get my point, they would have been able to escape from the capsule. Yeah. So sometimes it's
SLS had the same thing, right? It had a solid. It's not about solid or liquid. I mean, they had
no, it's the escape pod or not,
right? Yeah, it's the escape tower pod.
SLS has a really good contingency. They'll just never launch with people on it. So I think that's how they make sure. They don't screw it up.
Okay, before we go hating on what's the Boeing thing? Not Starlink, not Starship. Starliner. Yeah, everything's got to be a star, right? So Starliner. Before we go hating on Starliner and Boeing, let's hate on Tom Hanks a little bit. Come on, we got to back it up. Now,
you want to hate on Tom Hanks?
I do. I want to hate on Tom Hanks. And, I would like to take credit for the falling, but honestly, it was pointed out to me by probably my best friend in the world. They're like, yeah, Tom Hanks this, Tom Hanks that. And they're like, bosom buddies. Do you know what bosom buddies is?
I don't know where you're going with this. No.
It's Tom Hanks in this ridiculous show from I think the 1970s. It's horrible. It's horrible. Okay. No, once you see that, you can't ever go back on Tom Hanks, even though he probably will get to walk on the moon because he's got enough money to buy. But
probably, yeah.
I'm just saying, you brought up Tom Hanks, so we got to bring up a little hate on Tom Hanks.
I'm very comfortable with saying Tom Hanks might be the most overrated American actor of all time, but I wouldn't have
I mean,
cited.
what are you guys
buddies as
talking about? He's okay. Let's move on.
I think there's a valid game of like, is the movie better with Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks? And it's almost always Tom Cruise.
That's just not true.
I
You think Forrest Gump would have been better with Tom Cruise?
so much better.
I think
What are you talking
think
about?
Top Gun would be better with
No.
Tom Hanks.
Oh,
No.
What are you?
I
don't
this is
think that,
in
but
favor of Tom Cruise. I'm saying Tom Cruise is almost always better in the role than Tom Hanks.
that's just not
Forrest Gump
accurate.
with Tom Cruise, so much better.
What are you talking? No, he
I'm not
wouldn't have been able to pull off the running scene the same way. Like,
All right. I want to put a finder's. What can we like promise our listeners if they can somehow
all four of them.
get us a cameo from Tom Hanks or Tom Cruise or
Oh, yeah.
or Tommy Lee Jones, any actor named Tom, absolutely any actor that's been in a movie that's on any of the streaming channels,
Yeah,
Netflix.
How about just anybody that's name is Tom?
Yeah,
anybody named Tom.
To a cameo at AstroForge. We'll bring him on the podcast.
Yeah.
We'll chit chat, and
Free
they can
admission.
they can push
Put
back
a
on
photo
like
of their face on vestry or something
right
like
and
that.
like what's why are you hating on Bosom Buddy or Top Gun 2 or let's do that.
How the fuck do we? Oh, yeah. Okay, so you were gonna take us off of Starliner, but you went on the detour of Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
So you want to go back to Starliner now?
Yeah,
No.
go shit on Boeing.
You want to shit on Boeing? All right, look, I mean, Boeing's full of a lot of smart engineers trying really hard, and there's this difficulty between. Well, is it a NASA design that Boeing is building, or is it a Boeing design that NASA is buying? And like, where in the middle is that? And it's all that gray area in the middle that makes it really hard. So I do feel for Boeing and their engineers, but also they kind of screwed the pooch on Starliner, right? Like, it's really expensive, it's really late. It's led Boeing to saying things as a corporation like, we're never going to do a firm fixed price space contract again. We're going to only do cost plus, because they're just getting eaten alive on it. And at the same time, meanwhile, Starship is blowing up one after another like pop rockets, and everybody's applauding it. And like, my God, can you imagine one of those SLS rockets blowing up? Like, there would be, not only would there be a congressional investigation, but I mean, they would just crush.
Yeah, there's a big difference here, though. I mean,
There
SLS is going to cost $42 billion, I think, is the number by the time we get to the first launch, right? Starship, it's really hard to get an estimate here, but I think Elon came out and said he raised about $5 billion for the Starship program. So let's double it and maybe it's $10 billion. I think capital means you have a chance of taking on more risk.
Yeah.
The reality is the reason we can take on more risk flying with our spacecraft and thinking different is because launch is so much cheaper that we have the luxury of taking on risk.
Yeah.
If we were going to spend $1 billion on each one of these missions, like, hell yeah, it has to work every single time 100% perfectly. I mean, that's how you end up with a Psyche mission, a Juno mission, a Europa Clipper mission, and those missions work really well. But if you're going to try to save costs, you got to take more risks. Those go hand in hand. And I think that's the big difference here.
Yeah.
So then let's take it back to how you two think about vestry. Like, when you start to put out the ConOps for this, how much detail do you go into, and where do you get to a point where you're saying, actually, this risk is not worth each incremental plan or contingency plan that we make? Like, how do you actually navigate that? Because I'm imagining that's a hard decision to make on any given phase of this plan.
I mean, number one is you start, right? Like, you have to come out and you've even seen us do this. Like, we'll break it into kind of segments. So, okay, we want to go land on the asteroid. What does that mean? Well, that means we have to launch, travel through space, and then land on the asteroid. Now you have 3 segments. Okay, well, what happens after launch? Well, cool, we need to launch, do a firing so we can get a slingshot around the moon and go out. Now you have 5 or 6 segments, right? And like, it's actually how it goes. And you just keep breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down. And what you'll find naturally is that you'll then run into these problems that you'll notice one team is dictating something on. So for instance, maybe that is, in our case recently, it's been like a lot of the problems we've had with sizing the spacecraft or things like this have been coming from thermal. That makes us go like, hold on. Take a step back. Is our ConOps too broad? Because are we giving the thermal team too big of a range where they have to operate over?
Yeah.
And so maybe we need to go tighten up the ConOps in that area so that the thermal team can operate within this construct. Or we need a whole bunch of fuel to get us out to some, distant object. Well, hey, maybe we don't need to go to such a distant object. What other options are there, right? And so the ConOps really continuously improves and changes. And that's just talking about the primary mission.
Yeah.
Then you talk about the safe modes, the contingencies we go through. I mean, it's a big conversation we've been having with Hans about like all the modes and going through it and saying, what is a safe mode? How do we go into it? What's the entry criteria? What's the exit criteria from a safe mode? Is it manual? Is it not? Like, it's a very detailed conversation. And if you get one thing wrong here, you don't think it all the way through, you can really screw it up.
Yeah. I mean, one of the we certainly are going to, how I think about it with Vestry is maximizing the learning from Odin and from Brocker before that, and how we design our systems and our spacecraft modes so that we maximize our chance of recovering from problems.
That's it. I mean, that's what NASA has really done a great job at on deep space missions. Is there's all these missions have had failures on them. Again, I don't think there's ever been a deep spacecraft that hasn't gone into safe mode. You don't hear about it.
Yeah.
We don't hear about the failures on Juno. We don't hear about the failures on Cassini. We hear about the ones that blow up or don't turn on and things like that. And that all sucks. But like,
yeah, once in a while the news will pick up like, oh, the Mars rover went into safe mode and whatever, but you don't really like, what does that mean? And it's like an engine light coming on.
yeah, they've done such a good job at figuring out how to solve these and go through. And you can do that with capital. Again, capital allows you to do a lot of things. If you're going to spend $2 billion on a Mars rover, like you better have all this shit figured out.
Yeah, or you
not. And so-
or you pay someone to think through a fault tree in detail for like 2 years. Like this person is thinking about nothing but like, what if this bit flips? What if that bit flips? What if this bit flips? Or
I think it's nice to think it's one person. It's usually a team.
well, yeah,
that works through this, right? I mean, that's what it's runaway cost. And so you have to come to a conclusion of like, what is the actual modes we're willing to consider? What are we not? And the reality is, for the price we're trying to build a spacecraft for, we're not going to have everything. We're not going to have a complete fault tree, and we understand that going into it. That's a really important piece of the business model we're going after.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to that, like, because it's not necessarily one person, but actually every time you add a person, it makes it more complicated from the standpoint of like, wait, well, what are you thinking through? What am I thinking through? How are you thinking through it? So I think at the scale of our spacecraft, it's actually another important point that we're not a team of 500 people. We're a team of less than 50 people. And so in a lot of cases, it really is one person thinking through a particular way that a system operates, and then having to stand up to their peers and say, this is how I'm thinking about it, and have questions asked them, from first principle physics. Well, did you think about this? Did you think about this? Did you, do that? And be able to answer those questions. And the first time you're like, I don't know. Okay, there's an action item, right? And you go figure that out as best you can.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that leads me to a next question of like, where do you learn how to do this? Like, what's your experience? Like, do you just all of a sudden get promoted into a role where you're like, oh, cool, ConOps is now part of my role, and I read a book, I learn from the old guy in the corner, like.
Oh yeah, the old guy in the corner is where you learn all the valuable stuff anyway. Totally true. I mean, you learn from your mistakes and hopefully other people's mistakes.
Okay.
Like smart people learn from their mistakes. Really intelligent people learn from other people's mistakes. And so ConOps is part of everyone's job. They may not label it, and it might not necessarily be a huge part of their day-to-day activity. But yeah, I mean, how you learn it from your mistakes and other people's mistakes, hopefully.
I'll say a little differently. I don't think you do learn it. I think it's requirement to the job. I think we've assigned this word of concept of operations to it. But what is it? It's like, it's actually just what we're building. There's nothing special here. Like, we need to go out to an asteroid. How do you break that down? It's any job that you go do, any one of these we go do. You want to build a skyscraper? It's actually, there's a concept of operations to build a skyscraper. You pour concrete on the foundation. You build the first floor. You build the second floor. Right? It's the same thing. We just call it a different word and work through it.
Yeah.
It's really all there is to it. I think
or you do like the original Twin Towers, right? And you actually have two different contractors competing, right? Those buildings were actually built by two different contractors.
Seriously?
Yeah, and they were like racing each other. It was like the greatest thing ever I've ever seen to like motivate contractors.
You gotta love how that works. Yeah. It is. And then I think where we really can learn from, and again, I think actually Hans said this really well. He said, like, the trick is not learning from your mistakes. It's making sure you don't repeat something that you could easily find in a book. And like, if I can go look up very quickly, like, what is a NASA safe mode and how does it work? And I make a mistake there that they made on some early missions, like, that's bad on us. We need to make sure that we're checking sources. We understand this. And I think that really falls on me and Robyn to go do that work, because the team is very hard pressed to just get their segment done. We have to be the ones that take a step back and ask the questions of like, is this the right work to be doing? And is it, how do we think about it?
Yeah. Any last thoughts on ConOps?
I feel like I need to go watch Con Air again.
I just hate this word. Like, it's such a weird word that we've abbreviated. And
Really?
yeah, like,
Why do you hate it so much?
because it's just dumb. Like, why can't we just say concept of operations? Why can't we just say it's what the fuck the spacecraft is doing? Like, why do we have to make this?
Well, it's
such-
more than what the spacecraft is doing, right? It's how you
Kind of.
intend to use the thing that you built.
It's the mission plan. I don't know.
Yeah,
Let's just
mission
use
plan.
like
Yeah.
normal words that normal humans would understand. We love to, as engineers, like come up with all this jargon so that
Yeah.
nobody knows what we're talking about, and we can pretend like we're in some special class. And I absolutely hate it.
Because I mean, in some ways, it is scenario planning, right? Like you're saying, I need to know what it needs to do at any given moment and what could go wrong and what are the range of outcomes that I can plan for and what are the range of outcomes that I just have to accept that are
There's
outside.
literally no difference in my planning that I would say like the Navy SEALs would use to go raid a building. It's the same thing. Like, okay, this door doesn't bust down. What do you do on this side?
No, it's totally different. Why do you go back to killing? Man, have you been watching like what's the oh my god. All right. No, you know what, I actually you bring up a good point though. I think we need to like hire an event planner, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm thinking like a wedding
Yeah.
or
Anything that has like a lot of moving
sorry, Matt, I'll
pieces.
keep on the killing,
like a
SEALs.
chief of staff.
Is
that what they do?
I don't know. What does a chief of staff do?
This is actually
I don't know.
it's a
I think
good
that's
question.
another word we added into like the startup thing of like chief of staff. Like it's like ConOps. It's just like a random word we made up that nobody understood.
We took that from politics.
Oh, did we?
What's a chief of staff do in politics?
The simplest definition that I've heard that makes sense is everything that the politician can't be attributed to.
So crimes?
Not necessarily crimes,
Plausible
but, like,
deniability.
Like if you were a Republican and he was a Democrat and you didn't want to be caught talking directly to him about something, you would communicate through your chief of staff.
Wait. So you're supposed to be doing shady shit for me? Oh, this is. Oh my God.
All right,
cool.
I gotta update my whiteboard here. I got some new
Yeah,
stuff.
we have the DeLorean way to raise money.
Yeah.
We'll do that. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
So wait, so then it's your job to find a famous Tom to bring on as a.
It's not my job at all. That's our listener's job now.
Oh,
I mean, I'll do the cameo with them, but I don't feel like
If Tom Cruise comes on, I don't want to be here.
Is this an anti-Tom Cruise
Yep,
statement?
I'm anti-Tom Cruise.
so
right
you're
now.
anti-Tom Cruise.
Just because you said he's better than Tom Hanks, I'm out.
Oh man. Wait,
Protesting.
So was Chap anti any Tom?
Yeah,
Is
which
there a
Tom do you want, chap? Think carefully about your answer.
Am I just choosing between Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise?
Yes.
No, any Tom. You could Tommy Lee Jones. What? I mean, come on, man.
I will say Tommy Lee Jones is probably the most underappreciated Tom.
Fugitive.
Fugitive is a great movie.
Yeah, totally great movie.
He just
Harrison Ford.
He had that like grandfatherly feel from probably his 30s, and there's just something about that. Like,
I mean, he
type
did
of-
Men in Black, and that movie is phenomenal.
Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he did Men in Black and Fugitive, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty wide range, right?
Yeah.
I don't
heard
see
he's an
Tom
asshole
Hanks doing that.
alcoholic, though. I don't know if he's a good guy.
I mean,
in real
there's a
life.
reason why they're just saying don't meet your what is it? Don't meet your stars. Don't meet your
Don't meet your heroes.
heroes. There you go. Something like that.
Huh.
All right. We can move on to mailbag. Oh, we only got one mailbag question today.
Oh man.
Is that because we got one submission, or is that because you guys tailored it out so we only looked at one?
Yeah.
Just one submission for today.
Nice.
Listener count going
What a
down.
revolt. Yeah.
But I want to call Andrew for being a second-time submitter. His question, dear AstroForge team, I just finished episode 9 and want to say I loved it. However,
What
I
was
had one
episode
question
9?
in the
You weren't here, so it was really good.
yeah. You should go back and listen to it. It was really great.
Never.
However, I had one question in the back of my mind while listening. You guys have always talked a lot about failure and how much you learn from said failures. I was just wondering, what's the biggest successes that have helped you learn the most? Has there been a first-time risk that worked, or has it always been from messing up that you guys have persevered? Again, love the work you guys are doing and can't wait for the next episode.
You learn a lot from success. And in fact, I would argue you learn more from success than from failure. In a lot of ways, if you look at Odin and its launch, one of the biggest successes we had was we communicated with it.
Yeah.
Right. And that shows us that like we turned on, we went in some mode we know about, right? We were able to send something back. We were able to talk to it and get a signal back. We were able to update our trajectories. We learned a lot from that. The reality is from failing, we actually don't learn a bunch. There's a whole bunch of reasons we could have failed at the end of the day. We think we've identified probably the top 2 or 3 that are there. We'll actually never know the answer to this. So I think discreetly, you actually learn a lot more from success than you do from failure. The difference there is that failure is really easy to post-analyze and where we spend all our time. So when we have a failure, we're going to look into it. If the software team goes out there and turns on a reaction wheel and it works the first time, like we don't spend any time, that's now done and we're good with it. If it doesn't, we really want to understand why. And so it really brings this question of like, well, what do you spend the time analyzing? We spend the time analyzing failures, not successes. And I think that's just the nature of the game, because you want to make sure that you can get rid of all the failures. Failures are costly, successes are not.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction that won't involve any actors named Tom. You know, it's actually kind of a problem when organizations don't spend time analyzing their successes, because sometimes if you don't set up your test criteria, pass-fail criteria correctly, it can look like a success, but actually it didn't succeed for the reason that you think necessarily. So it's actually just as important to set up pass-fail criteria that is meaningful and understood ahead of time, so that whether you have a success or a failure, you understand.
You want to talk about, I don't know if you can, Astra, the first launch?
Well, I mean, I never worked for them.
Perfect. It's a great example, I think, of a perceived success that was actually a failure.
Yeah. And I think there's other ones.
Hold on, does that mean you're not going to talk about it?
Yeah, I'm totally not going to talk about Astra.
Fair enough.
I feel like it's always a good podcast when we get to the point where someone's like, I'm going to opt out of
Come
this
on, Robyn,
conversation.
you never were in it. Did you sign any agreements? You got anything, or can you talk about it?
I prefer to talk about failures that I've been involved in.
Fair.
Unfortunately, there's a lot, but
Blowing up a couple Falcons.
Oh man. Yeah. So let's look at the successes of some of the original Falcon ones, right? As opposed to the failures. Like you can go read about all the failures. There's failure reports. There's other podcasts and blogs and lots of people that talk about the failures. Some of which are not actually discussed publicly, right? Like some of the failures that are like, oh, this is what failed. Oh, by the way, there's more than one failure, right? Like that's another thing you got to watch out for. Success or failure. No, it's not just binary. Oh, in fact, there was 3 other things that would have ended that particular launch for other reasons, right? And it's really important to understand those. Otherwise, you just find out that next one on the next launch kind of thing. But in terms of successes with Falcon 1, I mean, even the first launch where it was a commitment to like actually launching, right? Like the willingness to be ready enough to push the button and launch. I mean, that's a huge success. We went from Vandenberg, where we were trying to launch and having all kinds of difficulties with the range, and finally sort of a la when we decided to build Odin last year in March, just like, okay, we're going to take a huge change in direction and we're going to not launch from Vandenberg and we're going to go to Kwajalein. And there's this little island called Amalek in the Kwajalein Atoll. That was a huge organizational like shift, right? That was a success because we were able to go out there and operate in the middle of the Pacific and launch on an army range in a way that we just would have continued slogging through the mud and swamp at Vandenberg Air Force Base. Their operational requirements were just different, and it was just much easier. So that is an area like I would say is a successful decision. I think building Odin in-house versus trying to continue working on a flawed vendor bus, I think is a success, right? Yeah. And I think we do need to look at some of those successes as well as the failures. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a whole bunch of failures, you don't get to look at the successes because you don't fucking exist. It's pretty simple logic, right? Like you got to make sure that you have to have successes to get this far, and we got to have more to continue on.
And there's a little bit of human nature, right? Like you don't look at like, oh, I ate yesterday. You look at like, I'm hungry today. So you got to look at. You don't look at your failures, and you're going to starve.
I think the other thing that's just hard, especially from an early stage company in terms of success, is that almost to every company, no one success is deterministic. So just one successful launch of Vestry, one successful launch of Falcon 1 doesn't mean that we are going to be here.
Oh man, you're talking about Virgin Orbit.
Yeah, like you just like, and so like you like in order to keep people focused and motivated, you have to say like this success is temporary. It is not a calcifying success at that point. And I think that's a hard thing to do in an early stage company.
Yeah, but it also depends on like how you measure success at an early stage company.
Sure.
I mean, Virgin Orbit raised what, almost $1 billion before we ever launched, and so from one standpoint, like that can be measured as a mark of success. And I think a lot of people will equate capital raised with a mark of success. And there's plenty of companies out there that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars and have launched once or never or whatever. Right, as we've gone through. I mean, one of the famous ones out there right now is Relativity. Relativity, raised I think $1.5 billion at a $4 billion valuation, and they had. They launched their 3D printed rocket, which was awesome to see. It didn't make it all the way to orbit, and that's what the company did. Or do you look at success as long-term success that goes in? And for how long-term? Like these things are all bounded by time. And so we can look at the company we love
he's
to
going
all shit on,
philosophical.
right?
By
we can look
time.
at Boeing, and like Boeing was actually a huge success story. I mean, when it was started, it's one of the first airplane companies, right? I think it started in 1910 or something, like who knows when, way back then. You had a lot of
Somebody
successes.
fact check Matt.
And that was, I think it started in 1917.
It's different than 1910.
How close am I?
1916. So
Stop by a year.
No way, man. Price is Right rules. You're over. So
it was renamed Boeing Airplane Company in 1917.
Okay, so it started in 1910, was renamed in 1917. Perfect.
Started in 1916.
Oh, 1960 was the OG name.
Yeah.
Whatever.
No,
Stop
no.
fact checking me. That's not the point.
The original name is Pacific Aero Products Company. So
God, that
Boeing
name
was
sucks.
a way better name.
I mean, dude's name was Boeing.
Yeah, right.
Like, I don't understand. Like, why wouldn't you just use your name? Well, in fact, why are we AstroForge? Why aren't we just like Geilich?
Because it's a fucking terrible last name that nobody can pronounce, right? Boeing was a hugely successful company, right? And now we equate Boeing with the laughing stock of the aerospace industry. I mean, they keep crashing airplanes. They can't build any spaceships. And like things have to always be constrained by time. I think it's an important marker to look here. So when we talk about success, it is all time dependent. We all view SpaceX as extremely successful right now. That may change in the next 10 years. It could go even more successful or down. Like these are all time boxed. So I think for us, it's important to look a little bit back in history, not too much, because if you look too much, like that resolution becomes much unclear and the same lessons don't apply. And this is where companies fail.
Yep.
This is how NASA has become what it's become. It keeps looking back to the 50s and 60s. And like, we got to stop looking back that far. You need to look back 5 years and see what you can iterate on.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, let's look forward 5 years. Like, look, we got a new NASA administrator, right? Like, and what do we think we could? What would we want NASA to be, or what would make sense for us?
We got a new NASA administrator who was a previous startup founder of a company called Shift4, right? Like this is a payments company, totally different than what we would expect. I think what's interesting there, though, is it's going to apply a lot of that quick iteration and thinking into how do you look at this. What I'm really excited about with Jared is he doesn't come in with some notion of this is how you run NASA. This is how you build a spaceship. And not to say this guy is stupid at all. I mean, he's been to space. He clearly.
I was going to say he's also one of the administrators that's actually an astronaut, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's gone to space and he's done stuff in space and has an appreciation for what that experience is.
And he cares a lot about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I hope that he can blend. It can go really badly. Maybe he blends two of the worst things together where you know what I mean? It could also go, I think, really well where he can say like, hey, we need to be a little more iterative, a little quicker on our feet, and we need to have a little bit more passion put back in. And I'll tell you this, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen to NASA in the 4 years. It's one of the first times I've been excited about NASA. The previous administrators just have not. I mean, I really think since Golden, you haven't had an administrator come in that you thought was anything other than a politician. And that's what I'm most excited about.
Cool.
It's a long, winding path from what's our biggest success. But with that, let's wrap this up. Thank you to Matt and Robyn for this week's episode of Roid Rage. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, leave a review, send in some questions for us.
Hold on. How many subscribers do we have? That's the real number.
That's a Rachel question.
Rachel?
I don't know if we have
Fail.
subscribers.
So we have 0.
Well, we have people who follow the podcast on Spotify.
Yeah, like we
and
would
Apple.
have to look specifically on the platforms.
We'll get those for you. Don't worry.
I think that means it's like 10 people.
It's not Joe Rogan, but
We're
that's
going to
not
be
a bad
Joe
thing.
Rogan.
We have 23 reviews on
Oh,
Spotify.
they all just shit on us or what?
No, we have a 4.7.
4.7. Cool.
All right, just out of curiosity, what does the Rogan Experience on Spotify have?
Joe Rogan has a 4.7 rating as well.
Fuck yeah, we're the same as Joe Rogan.
I think that sounds equivalent to me. All right, that's a wrap.
Oh, I
We're
thought
the
we
same-
were already.
We're the same as Joe Rogan.
Wait a minute. We're still recording? I thought this was like bloopers.
I don't know.